Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our webinar on what's new in the DOJ's revised guidance. As some of you know, this guidance was published earlier in the year, and there's a lot of questions around what actions to take and what to make of it. And so in this webinar today, I have a colleague, a friend of ours, and an industry expert, Heidi Kocher, and she's going to be presenting on what's really included in the revised guidance and what to make of it for pharma and device compliance. So just by way of a quick introduction, Heidi has over 20 years of experience in healthcare, legal and compliance related issues. And she is based out of Texas and has worked with a variety of different companies on both sides to be able to implement and organize compliance programs. So I've presented with Heidi on a couple of occasions before, and so very pleased to be welcoming Heidi on this webinar today. Welcome, Heidi. Okay. Heidi, if you can speak something, let me see if you're able to chime in. I think you might be on mute. Let's see if I can unmute you. Okay, I am unable to hear you, Heidi. So if you want to check in on your connection, meanwhile, we'll try to. Okay, I'll cover the logistics of the webinar, and hopefully we can figure out your audio connection as well. Just quickly, by way of introduction, I'm founder and CEO at Core Data, and over the last 4 years, we've spent working on developing the most comprehensive compliance operations suite of technology products. And before that, I spent over a decade in building analytical applications for Fortune 500 companies. So moving forward, in terms of the housekeeping items, you can ask all your questions through the GoToMeeting panel, GoToWebinar. I'll try to be moderating. I'll try to moderate this discussion and bring up the questions as necessary on different sections. Again, we want to start with a disclaimer. The views and opinions that are expressed by the speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the companies they represent. This webinar will be recorded and a copy of the presentation slides made available to you as well. All the lines are muted, and please note that all slides are copyrighted and may be used with attribution to the copyright holder. For anything related to webinar support, you can ask on the chat or questions box, or you can call this number 832-519-1365, and we'll be able to assist you. So with that, I think Heidi, you're seems to be unmuted, so I'll cover the agenda and then I'll hand it over to you so you can take us forward. So in terms of the agenda today, we're going to talk about the challenges, factors that prosecutors consider while investigating corporate organization for an offense. It's good to know why you may be put on the investigation. Also, the key is internal evaluation of your compliance program based on DOJ's revised guidance. What are you doing internally to make that effective? And then tips for improving the compliance program's adequacy and effectiveness in light of the latest guidance. So with that, I'll transition over to Heidi. Heidi, I'll make you the presenter, and feel free to share your screen. Just give me 1 second, and then from there, you can take us forward. If you want to speak and say something, I can just verify whether we're able to hear you as well.
Yes, thank you very much for that kind intro, Mohammed.
Okay, we can hear you perfectly loud and clear. If you want to share your slide deck, we can.
Let me see. It is, I thought I had it on share already, but maybe not. Let me see here.
I'm going to just make you the presenter.
Sharing, show screen. There we go. Whoops.
Okay, you should be the presenter now.
There we go. Okay, show my screen, and let's start from the beginning. And
okay, I can see your screen.
there we go.
Yes, it's all good now. it's all over to you now.
Awesome. Very good. Well, welcome all to today's webinar. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days. I know that time is precious. So I actually have a fair amount of information, so I am going to move along at quite a clip. As Mohammed said, you'll get these slides afterwards, and please feel free to reach out and let me know if you have any questions. I do need to put in a disclaimer. Again, as Mohammed said, this is for educational and general information. It is not legal advice for you and your situation. If you have a specific situation, you do need to be talking with your attorneys. As they always say on the car commercials, your mileage may vary, and so even in these kinds of situations, outcomes do differ depending on very specific facts. All right, let me, come on, move ahead. All right, so before I go into the changes themselves, you need to kind of understand where these came from and what the issue is with these. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history because I think this will help you all understand. This is the DOJ's changes that were published earlier this year should not be considered as a revolution, but really as an evolution of prior guidance and prior DOJ thoughts. And so this all starts well back in the 1980s with the 1984 Sentencing Reform Act. And the background there is that when trials were held, and particularly in criminal trials, and judges passed down sentences were all over the place, and they felt that the Congress felt and the judiciary felt that people who committed similar crimes and had similar circumstances should end up with similar sentences, and that was not happening. So they passed the Sentencing Reform Act, which basically set up the Sentencing Guidelines Manual, which was published in 1987. And this has been now updated almost every year. And what the federal sentencing guidelines do is they set out factors for evaluating what is a mitigating factor, so would reduce your sentence, or an aggravating factor, which would increase your sentence. And as part of the federal sentencing guidelines in 2004, they actually added a section discussing whether there is an effective compliance and ethics program. So you can see, again, took 20 years to get from the Sentencing Reform Act to getting the first mention of an effective compliance program, but then the stuff starts to pick up steam. The background to the 2004 edition has, again, two memos. So the way the DOJ operates is they have these internal manuals, but in the interim, because it takes so long to update a manual and because it's a rather formal process, what an attorney general can do, and often does do, is issue a memo, and they explain sort of their rationale and a new procedure, and then the elements of that memo are usually incorporated into the DOJ manual or the Federal Sentencing Guidelines Manual or something similar. So prior to the 2004 section on compliance and ethics programs, we actually had Eric Holder write a memo in 1999 where he actually talks about bringing criminal charges against corporations and looking at the adequacy and of existence and adequacy of a corporation's compliance program. So even though it didn't get put into the memo until 2004, in 1999, they're already talking about compliance programs. So we are 20 years into compliance programs, people. So again, this is something that the government very clearly expects you to have. In 2003, the Thompson memo also repeated language about having the existence and adequacy of a corporate compliance program in evaluating what is going on with a terrible situation. Again, December 2006, we have some more language. In 2006, they add pre-existing to the compliance program, so it has to be a pre-existing compliance program. And in 2008, there's a memo that talks about corporate self-policing, encouraging voluntary self-disclosures, and they actually say in the 2008 memo that the existence of a compliance program in and of itself is not sufficient to avoid charging a corporation. So again, you can see this evolution over time about it's not enough to just have a compliance program on paper. In 2015, there was the Yates memo. This now promoted individual accountability for corporate wrongdoing. The background to that is there were numerous prosecutions, and what they were realizing was that companies were viewing the settlements with the government as simply a cost of doing business and factoring it into their profit and loss statements and their accounting statements, but things weren't really changing. And this was just viewed as a cost of doing business without making actual changes. 2018 was the addition of the use of monitors and monitoring agreements. So we have had corporate integrity agreements under the OIG for some time. That was back into the early 2000s. But in a broader basis for companies as a whole, not just in healthcare, by 2018, that is added to the toolkit as well. Then we have in 2016, there was also a U.S. Attorney Bulletin specifically looking at healthcare fraud and again discussing the importance of compliance programs. One of the most important things that I think happened is in 2017, the Department of Justice actually hired somebody, Hui Chen, and she had the specific role of being an attorney at the Department of Justice, but her role was compliance counsel. And so when the Department of Justice went to charge somebody, she would come in and evaluate the company's compliance program and provide insight and input as to whether or not the compliance program was actually working and whether the company had done sufficient implementation of the compliance program to warrant lesser charges against individuals or companies. And as part of that, she did in 2017 the first evaluation of a corporate compliance program. This was updated in 2019 and of course just now in 2020. So that kind of gives you some of the history from the Department of Justice about how these things have progressed. There's a little bit additional history here. And again, remember the Department of Justice is the government as a whole. This applies to all kinds of industry sectors, not just healthcare. But one of the things that they did, they looked at the OIG's compliance program guidances. And again, these were published starting back in 1998. They looked at the special fraud alerts and bulletins, and all of these were used to help develop and write the evaluation of corporate compliance program. There were other collaborations that I just want to put out there. There's the joint OIG-HCCA publication on measuring compliance program effectiveness. This was in March 2017. Although Hui Chen was not intimately involved in this, she again took it as something to look at. And then in 2015, there was a 4-organization publication, Practical Guidance for Healthcare Governing Boards on Compliance Oversight. This was the OIG, the American Health Lawyers Association, the Association of Healthcare Internal Auditors, and Healthcare Compliance Association. So again, a lot of background information that the DOJ drew on when developing its evaluation of corporate compliance programs. So as I said, the first of these was in 2017. They updated it in 2019, and they've updated it again in 2020. The following slides, you will see some yellow highlighting on it. Where you see yellow highlighting, those were things that were added or changed in the 2020 update. And I think these are very important because, again, this reflects an evolution of the Department of Justice's approach to compliance programs. So again, this is updating existing principles of federal prosecution, and a prosecutor has to ask three fundamental questions. Is the corporation's compliance program well designed? Is the program adequately resourced and empowered to function effectively? And does the corporation's compliance program work in reality and in practice? As I put down at the bottom, this document is not a checklist. They will not go through this and say, check, yes, you applied here. Oh, no, this one, they failed on this one. It is a set of principles, not a checklist, and it is not one size fits all. So even though we're going to go through some of these, you should not anticipate that you have to answer every single one of them. These are, again, questions and principles that are applied to evaluating whether or not you do have a good compliance program. And again, the update here on one of these three fundamental questions is the update for 2020. I thought is very interesting. Is the program, and you'll see here in yellow, adequately resourced and empowered to function effectively? So this gets at the problem that folks had compliance programs, but the compliance officers were telling the DOJ, and they were seeing in practice that the compliance officer did not have enough resources and did not have enough power to really make compliance part of the fabric of everyday business. So now let's dive into a little bit more of these individual compliance programs in depth, and we're going to go through some of the questions that they have under these three fundamental principles. So the first principle is the compliance program well designed? And again, just because you have a compliance program doesn't mean it is well designed, doesn't mean it has thought into it. So what they are looking at is they are going to be looking at, have you done a risk assessment? What are the policies and procedures your company has? What is the training communication? What is a confidential reporting structure? What does that look like? And if you've done any investigations, what is that process? How you manage third parties and mergers and acquisitions. And if you've done any compliance work at all, you know that we have the 7 principles of an effective compliance program, right? And you'll see risk assessment, policies and procedures, training and communication, confidential reporting structure, and management of third parties, which is basically your related to your sanction screening and so on. You'll see that those should be very familiar principles to you all. Okay, so we are going to do a polling question. How many of you have conducted a periodic risk assessment? You've never conducted one is answer A. B, we did, but we don't know when. C, within the last year. And D, what is a risk assessment? So we'll leave this open for a moment, Mohammed.
Yes, Hedy. We'll wait a few seconds now. We are getting responses. So far it's 100% within the last year.
Okay, so it looks like we've closed the poll, right?
And Hedy, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so you can see the results on the screen.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, it's 100% within the last year.
Wow, that is awesome. That is the best poll result I have ever had in any webinar, that 100% of the people have done a risk assessment within the last year. That is awesome. Typically, we get maybe 50% have done a risk assessment at some time, but I've never had 100% within the last year. So kudos to everybody on this webinar. And doing the risk assessment, as you all know, is very important, because if you don't know what your risks are, you won't know how to implement strategies to combat them. So under the risk assessment process, again, these are some of the questions that the DOJ will be asking. You know, what is the methodology that you use to assess your risks? And then do you have higher level risks? Have you evaluated which are more serious, and are you focusing them on them? And again, here in yellow, these are the updates for this year. And you'll see that what they want is a compliance program to be continuously updated. And this is why it's so important to do a risk assessment annually, because if you don't do a risk assessment annually, your risks are likely to have changed, but your compliance program has not changed to address those risks. So you'll want to see, you know, have the changed risks led to changes in policies and procedures and controls? If you've had any lessons learned from investigations or from monitoring, you know, what is going out in the industry or attending webinars, are those incorporated in your compliance program? And it doesn't require a whole lot to do this, but they do want to see this kind of documented. So I am very impressed that everybody has done a poll or a risk assessment within the last year. That is awesome. The next thing they are looking at is, again, policies and procedures. Again, you see in highlights here. This is, as I said before, it's an evolution, not a revolution. We know you're supposed to have policies and procedures. We know they're supposed to be well designed. We know they're supposed to be comprehensive and accessible. But some of the things they have added this year is asking, what is the process for updating policies and procedures? People have policies and procedures, but I recently finished working with a company, and the last time they updated some of their policies and procedures was about 5 years ago. Well, there's an awful lot that's happened in the last 5 years, and I understand they were just been very busy, and of course this has been a crazy year with COVID-19, but updating your policies and procedures is an absolute must, because again, you won't be addressing existing risks and shifting risks if you're not updating your policies and procedures. So a new focus that the DOJ has added this year is, are your policies accessible to your employees and your personnel? Where are they located? Do people know how to find them? Are they searchable by a keyword or topic? And do you do any kind of tracking to see which policies might be referenced more frequently? Now, that's something that you probably can't do if you've printed out your policies and procedures and have them in a binder, but if you have them on some internal drive, you could probably set up IT metrics so that you can see which policies are referenced. And again, if policies are being referenced, that's going to tell you something. That means that people may not understand a particular area, so that may actually provide you an avenue for training. It may mean that the policy is written poorly and it needs to be tweaked and edited. It could mean a whole lot of different things, but tracking to see which policies are referenced is very important. And then we have some other things here. They haven't updated these, but they're looking at who's responsible for operationalizing the policies, you know, making sure that they're implemented. And of course, that's going to vary by company and by the size of the company. And who are the gatekeepers? What kinds of guidance and training are you providing to key gatekeepers, managers? One of the most important things that I have run across is that managers are the first line that employees go to when something goes wrong. And if the manager is not clear on what misconduct looks like or how to elevate it, then it doesn't go addressed and corrected. Training and communications, again, you know, you need to do some sort of generic training, but everybody at this point is like ready to have their eyeballs fall out by the general corporate compliance training. So you can certainly do that, and you should do that. People need to understand what the basic risks are. But then you need to tailor your training for individuals in high-risk areas and make sure that your managers or supervisors, again, understand perhaps different areas and have different or additional training. You want to figure out who determines who is trained and on what. So looking again at the updates for 2020, in the content of the training itself, one of the key things that the OIG has added this year is, can employees ask questions about the information learned? Now, this is going to go to the design of your compliance training. Many people are now doing computer-based compliance training, and that is certainly useful. It takes a burden off of the compliance officer, but it doesn't really allow for interaction with the attendees. So you have to think about now how you can get employees information if they have questions. Is there some way that you can follow up on that? Perhaps send an email, telephone employees if your company's not too big, and figure out how to increase the engagement with the employees and make sure that they can follow up with any questions. And then the other update this year is, how do you address employees who fail tests? Most of the time, most of our employees pass the tests, but if you have somebody who fails the test, what do you do with them? Do you just have them take the training again and retest? You know, and as to this, you know, if they retest, are your questions shuffled so that they just don't remember the correct order? Do you do one-on-one training with them? Do you prohibit them from taking on certain functions or jobs? Do you require extra monitoring? How do you handle these people who fail tests? Because if they fail a test, they're a potential risk to you. So again, there haven't been any changes this year about the communication about the misconduct. But again, this is something that you should be thinking about. You know, if there has been misconduct in the company, how is this communicated and what are the results communicated to employees? So a couple of years ago, there was a pretty big Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case, FCPA case, based out of China, and the company actually escaped prosecution because they were able to show that the individual who committed the misconduct had received many, had not just gone through the training, but had received many emails, many publications about what was correct and incorrect. And over the space of a couple of years, they had reached out to this individual approximately 15 times with, you know, this is the correct way to do things, this is prohibited, and so on and so on. And so even though the individual was prosecuted, the company actually was not prosecuted because they had made an effort. So you again want to have documentation of that kind of effort and make sure that the guidance is out there for your employees and any others who may have questions about this. So I'm presuming that a lot of you are medical device or pharma companies, and many of you may be working with subcontractors. So the availability of the guidance here specifically mentions employees, but you should be aware that this is also for non-employees, your contractors, your distributors. How do they get access to this information as well? And you need to think about that too. Confidential reporting and investigation. So again, do you have a confidential anonymous reporting mechanism? And this year they've actually put here, how is it publicized to employees and to third parties? So again, my point about your distributors, your contract workers, you know, anybody out there who's a third party who might have a concern, the physicians that you're marketing to, the hospitals that you are selling your products into, who else can access this confidential, anonymous reporting mechanism. And the other thing that they added this year is, has the company tested to see if employees are aware of the hotline and comfortable using it? So how are you going to do this? Well, one of the ways is to do a poll, but there may be other ways to see if you're aware of the hotline. And again, think about how you might do this. If you're doing anything like field ride-alongs, maybe this becomes a question that you ask the person you're riding along with, if they're aware of the hotline, do they feel comfortable using it, and so on. So again, a lot of these things are an evolution, not revolutionary, but these are things that the DOJ has recently realized are good questions to be asking. And again, properly scoped investigations by qualified personnel. I'm not going to say much about that other than make sure that the manager over that particular individual or unit is not the one doing your investigation. You want to have somebody independent from the particular business unit come in and do the investigation. Make sure that it is properly scoped so that it can be independent and objective. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Investigation response. How are you making sure that you have a prompt response? There are some cases out there. One of the cases where there was an overpayment, and it took the company years to do the overpayment, and that became the subject of a prosecution. And you shouldn't be taking 3 years to repay an overpayment and only doing it dragging your feet when the government insists that you do the repayment. So these are the kinds of things you want to be looking into. If you have an issue, what is your process? How quickly are you doing it? I mean, some things take a little bit longer, absolutely understand that, but you shouldn't be spending months and months and months and months and months or years investigating and responding. Most issues are not that deep. And then resources and tracking of results. And again, looking at this, the yellow highlight, are you testing the effectiveness of the hotline, such as tracking a report from start to finish, the cradle to grave approach? And there's other ways that you can do this. You can do the secret shopper approach. You can call a hotline and make a report and then track and see what happens to that report. I've actually done that myself. The results are sometimes very interesting to see. It often goes through the independent third party who is doing the hotline, goes through them pretty quickly, but a lot of times it gets bogged down in the company itself for a variety of reasons. So again, things to look at when you're investigating. Management of third parties, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because I've got a whole lot more slides to go through, but again, they want to look at how are you managing your third parties? Is it a risk-based approach? Do you have controls on your third party? Are these controls appropriate? And what mechanisms are you using to ensure that the contract terms are being held to, that the payment terms are appropriate, that the services are performed, and the compensation is commensurate? That's going to require a lot of work by a lot of people in the organization. So again, think through how you are going to do these third parties. Here, you'll see that the highlight here is how does the company conduct risk management throughout the lifespan of the relationship, or is it done mostly during the onboarding process? What I have discovered is that when people have third-party relationships, be it a distributor or a contract worker or anybody else, there's a lot of work that happens at the beginning People are evaluated, they're screened, you look into their finances, you'd run Dun and Bradstreet reports, you may even do some kind of an investigation. If they're overseas, you may engage a company to do third-party evaluations, make sure they're not government employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You do this at the onboarding, and then it's kind of a one and done. That's not really useful because a lot of these distributors know that if they get through the onboarding process, or these third parties know that if they can get through the onboarding process, then they're essentially, I hate to use the word, but essentially unmolested during the rest of the time with the company. And they can work with your sales personnel or whomever, and there isn't a whole lot of oversight. So you need to conduct risk management and oversight throughout the life of the relationship and the contract. And this is now something that the DOJ is specifically looking into. And again, do you have any red flags that you track? How do you resolve those? And if you have third parties that don't pass due diligence or have, again, pretty serious such red flags that you terminate them, how do you ensure that they're not rehired later? Again, this cannot be a one and done type thing. You have to have sort of like a blacklist or perhaps a yellow list to manage these kinds of parties. And this, again, particularly for larger organizations, is very important because you can't rely on the memory of individuals. You have to be double checking this, and you have to have multiple stops throughout the place. So perhaps this happens, yes, in the legal department as you're doing at the contract stage, but then the list should be shared perhaps with accounts payable so that they don't cut a check to an inappropriate party. Think about how you're going to manage these kinds of third parties. If you're doing mergers and acquisitions, do you do any pre-acquisition due diligence? I have actually worked on transactions where the due diligence acquired or occurred after signing of all the paperwork and payment of money because people had, for lack of a better term, stars in their eyes and just really wanted to get the deal done. They didn't do as thorough a due diligence as they should have. And on the back end, there were significant issues resulted in self-disclosures to the government and corporate integrity agreements. So you need to do pre-acquisition due diligence, and if not, make sure you can justify why you didn't do that. And then after you actually have gone to the due diligence, make sure you do post-acquisition audits as well. Again, integration is not always a smooth thing. You want to find out where those bumps in the process are and make sure that you're understanding how the cultures merge and catching any of those kinds of issues early on. So after you do an acquisition audit, it would not be a bad idea. After you do an acquisition, it would not be a bad idea to do an audit in the first 6 months and then in the first year afterwards. That's just my thought. So the second major question was, again, is the compliance program adequately resourced and empowered to function effectively? So one of the big things is commitment by senior and middle management. You know, you've heard a lot about the tone at the top. That is definitely an issue, but I think it is much more the tone at the middle. How is your middle management doing this? What kinds of commitment and oversight are they engaging with their employees and personnel? Again, any third parties that they might be managing. I have had more issues with middle management than I have with senior management. Senior management usually says the right thing. They often, however, are also telling people, you know, here are our financials. And even though senior management is saying the right thing, middle management often then makes a decision that the profit perspective is much more important than what senior management says, and that's where things go off the rails. In terms of the structure of your compliance department, again, the question added this year is, why was this compliance structure chosen? And this gets to the issue of where is compliance housed? Is it in the financial section of your company? Is it part of your legal department? Why? Make sure you have a justification for why a particular structure was chosen. And again, make sure that there is sufficient funding. It is not uncommon. It is very common. It's probably the biggest problem we see out there, that compliance programs are understaffed and underfunded. And anytime compliance asks for money, it is the compliance officer or the compliance department is told no. So as part of this, they're going to look at seniority and status. Again, the more senior and the more status a compliance officer has, the better the DOJ thinks that compliance is integrated into your organization. It's important. Or is your compliance officer stuck in a broom closet, right? And in terms of experience and qualifications, they want to see, and this is the addition this year, is the company investing in further training and development of your compliance personnel. As we've said, compliance develops, thought processes change, new methods come along. Are you making those available to your personnel, and are they getting the training and education they need, the continuing education? Sufficient data, access, and resources. It is also not uncommon for compliance to ask for documentation or data and to be told that they can't have that. So this is one of the things that the DOJ is really looking at. Do you have sufficient access to data to permit monitoring and testing of policies and controls? And are there any impediments limiting access? What are you doing to address those? And again, these are going to be questions that they really ask if there is something that has gone wrong. It's okay to outsource compliance. That's not a concern there. But again, the DOJ has some questions about this if you've outsourced your compliance, particularly if you are a smaller entity. Incentives and disciplinary measures. Again, you have to have a partner in human resources. And so there is a bunch of questions about how you are partnering with human resources in making investigative and disciplinary decisions. And again, you'll see the highlighted question here is, are you monitoring your investigations and discipline to ensure consistency? One of the things that has happened over the years is that lower employees and middle management gets punished a lot, often by termination, but senior management that has engaged in misconduct gets a little bit of a slap on the wrist or nothing at all. And so you want to make sure that any discipline is handed out equitably and is not dependent on role or function or level in the company. The incentive system, again, you want to look at your incentives. How are you rewarding people? Are you incentivizing for compliance and ethical behavior? Are you bonusing them? There's a variety of ways that you can do this in your annual pay review, your annual review that can be reflected in compensation. So again, things to think through about there. The DOJ did not update anything here this year. The third, and I think this may be the most important thing, is does the compliance program really work in everyday life in practice? And here we have our second polling question, which is, have you evaluated whether your compliance program actually works? The answers are, A, we track things like how the percentage of employees complete their initial compliance training. B, when we have an issue, our root cause analysis looks at the underlying policies or training that would have addressed this issue. C, we conduct surveys among employees to assess compliance culture. Or D, wouldn't even know where to start on evaluating this.
Yeah, we'll give it a few seconds where we are getting votes. All right, Heidi, can you see the results on your screen?
I can see them in the chat box, but I cannot see them on the screen.
Can you read them, or should I read it
Yeah,
for you?
sure, I can read them off. So we have 20% saying they track employees completing their initial compliance training, and that's very common. That's sort of what I would expect everybody to be doing. 40% said we look at the underlying policies that may have caused an issue or the underlying training. 30% said we conduct surveys among employees to assess compliance culture, and 10% said we didn't even know where to start. So there's actually sort of no wrong answer or no right answer to this, except maybe we don't even know where to start, and that's not even a wrong answer, that's just a lack of education. But section or question answer A is sort of the bare minimum that I would expect. You know, you're tracking who's completing their compliance training when. That's sort of the bare minimum at this point. When you have an issue, you should definitely be looking at a root cause analysis, because again, this is going to tell you what was the driver of the issue, and it's going to tell you what needs to be changed. So that's sort of the next step up. If you're conducting surveys among employees, that is awesome. That is fantastic. That is what I would like most companies to be doing eventually. Now, it is kind of hard if you're a smaller company, because it's very hard to, make those anonymous. But certainly as you gain some kind of size, you should be able to do that. And again, you can assess compliance culture among your personnel, even if you're a smaller company, by having sort of the equivalent of like a focus group, getting people together and talking about that. So great results, very, very good. And for those of you who don't even know where to start, well, there's lots of tools out there, and please feel free to contact me so that we can get you all on the right track. So you want to be doing continuous improvement and testing. Again, you've got audits that you should be doing. You should have a fixed set of audits that you're doing annually. You want to be then doing periodic different audits as your risks change and as you have different things. Perhaps you're expanding into a new area. Perhaps you have a new product. Perhaps you have new customers. You'll want to be looking into these things. Perhaps you have new employees. You want to be auditing them and then reporting them up to senior management and your board on a regular basis. You want to be checking your controls. Again, what kinds of controls do you have in place? I have done trainings for accounts payable and accounts receivable departments, and I will tell you that I think the accounts receivable and accounts payable department are very important control points in a company, and certainly your compliance staff should be taking advantage of and working with those financial personnel. They will help you uncover a lot of things, very important for controls. And again, your culture of compliance. It's not enough to just say once a year, yes, we do compliance, here's our compliance training. You'll want to make sure that this is an ongoing thing, and you want to get all of your employees involved. You do town halls, you can do, send out memos, you can send out blast emails. There's lots of ways to help increase the culture of compliance. And again, your updates need to be happening on an ongoing basis. Now, I'm not saying that every month you need to update your compliance program, but you should be doing it at least annually. And so what you want to do is you want to be looking at your investigations, lessons learned from what has happened in your company. You want to look at what is happening out there in the industry. You want to be taking all of these things and working them into your compliance program. So even though this was published in June, in fall, we had updated Stark and anti-kickback regs being published. You want to have somebody taking the training about those updated regs, looking at what they're saying, and then figuring out how that affects your compliance program, and then updating your compliance program. And all of this, I want to just make sure you understand, is you need to document that you have done this. You know, we looked at our compliance program on this date, and we made these updates based on the fact that we attended this training or this webinar or what have you. Make sure you do that periodically. You want to be investigating your misconduct. That's kind of a duh issue, but you know, people don't always investigate thoroughly, and you want to have a response. You know, what is your corrective action plan? And that comes into this one here. Have you done a root cause analysis? Have you checked for prior weaknesses? What controls failed? And you want to be looking at the payment systems. Again, so my comment about the accounts payable and accounts receivable, you really want to make sure you're working hand in hand with those people. The DOJ didn't make updates to this year, so that's actually a really good thing. Payment systems, again, how was the misconduct funded? Are you managing your vendors? And were there any indicators prior to the actual misconduct that something might be wrong? So had you done an audit and the audit flagged a potential issue with a control? Did you have complaints? And you want to look at why were these opportunities missed? This is all part of your analysis and remediation. You want to have specific remediation steps, and then of course make sure you know who is accountable for implementing those. A corrective action plan is really great, but if it never gets implemented, what's the point of a correction action plan, right? The DOJ didn't make a whole lot of changes to this section here this year, but again, these are things that are pretty well understood and shouldn't really be any kind of an issue or question for anybody out there. All right, moving on to our pro tips and suggestions. Compliance can be an overwhelming thing, so my suggestion is start small if you don't know where to start. Pick one thing to address it and then do it. And then pick another area, figure out what you need to do audits, come up with a corrective action plan and address it, and so on and so on. It is better to do something small and get it done rather than have these very, very broad and ambitious goals and get nothing done. Make sure you do something, anything. Use common sense in your approach. There are, again, people who try to do something that is really far and above board, but really use common sense in your approach. It doesn't need to be, you know, a moonshot. You can do things that are much more commonsensical for your organization than they might be for somebody else. A key to this, again, you want to conduct a risk assessment, and this can be relatively informal for smaller companies. You know, you can just poll your employees, send out an email saying, hey, team, what do you think are our risks this year? And then there you go, collate that information. It'll help you get started, and you can work off it from there. Make sure that you can understand and explain your risks. If somebody says, well, this is a risk, but you don't understand what it is and you can't explain it, then you're not going to be able to fix it. So make sure you can really understand your risks. And you want to tailor your compliance program to your specific risks. A large company has different risks than a small company. A pharma company has different risks than a medical device company. A company that does only private insurance has different risks than somebody who takes Medicare and Medicaid. Make sure you understand your risks and tailor your program to your risks. And you want to make sure you have policies and procedures for your key risks. Again, you know, this is very important because the policies are going to outline what your expectations are and how you're going to address these risks. And again, these policies and procedures should be tailored to your company and your situation. I routinely find people who have downloaded a policy and a procedure from the internet, which is not a bad place to start. Don't get me wrong. It's an okay place to start. But you need to read through the policy and make sure that it applies to your situation. Again, I find people downloading stuff and they change it from ABC company to XYZ company, and then they don't read through the policy, and there's stuff in the policy that absolutely does not apply to them. It is very frustrating, and the problem is that your policies and procedures are considered your internal law and regulations by the government. So if something comes wrong, they're going to look at your policies and procedures, and if they don't even apply to your situation, the government is going to be coming from the position of what is up with these people. They don't even have the right policies and procedures in place. They're not even addressing their situation. They clearly don't understand what their risks are. They clearly don't understand what their policies are. Now we've got an issue, and that's where you're starting off from. So make sure that your policies and procedures are tailored to your company. You want to periodically update and review your policies and procedures, preferably yearly. Make sure you have a table on your policies and procedures or something that indicates when you reviewed and updated them. And it's always a good idea to have sort of a revision history that indicates what you've updated, when you updated it, because again, it shows the progression that you have, and it is part of the documentation that you may have in terms of saying, this is how our compliance program evolved over time and developed. Employees must be trained on the specific policies and procedures applicable to them. So some employees are absolutely bound to receive specialized training. For one corporate integrity agreement that I did, we had a massive spreadsheet where we actually went by job title and assigned people by job title to specific courses and training that they needed because of the level of issues that were revealed by the government's investigation and that were required by the CIA. So make sure you clearly have some sort of matrix that identifies who gets what training. And again, not everybody is going to need every training. Note that training takes many forms and does not need to be an hour in length. I often get, oh my gosh, how am I going to get people to sit through training? It doesn't need to be that way. It can be a memo to the field. It can be, if you're doing a newsletter, have a compliance corner, put something in a column in your newsletter. You know, there's lots of ways to do training, and it doesn't all need to be an hour. And in fact, I would advocate that it's probably better to do 15 minutes of training and make sure that people paid attention and got the training down and internalized it, as opposed to an hour where by the end of it, people's eyes glazed over. Compliance has to be visible throughout your organization. If you have a compliance officer, again, who's stuck in a broom closet, this is a problem. If you're a compliance officer who doesn't like to get out and walk around, work on that. You need to be visible throughout your organization. You need to be talking to senior management and lower employees. Your management must clearly and publicly support compliance. If you don't, you're starting off at a negative. Find your allies. You have allies all throughout your organization. You would be surprised where you find allies. So I can think of, again, as I mentioned, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Your IT people are going to be your allies, and human resources are good allies as well. So that's 4 departments right there that may be allies to you in getting through this. You may have other people in your organization who are your allies. Outsource your sanction screening. Okay, I'm just going to say this, outsource your sanction screening. A lot of people do it in-house. It's very easy to drop the ball on this. It's worth the cost to do it. You can do it for very inexpensively. Trust me, it's worth outsourcing your sanction screening. Listen to employee complaints. This is probably one of the biggest things I have down here. It is inevitable that a whistleblower is somebody who complained internally first and wasn't listened to or shut down. Probably there's a couple of people who might just have gone straight to whistleblower, but probably 95 or 99% of the whistleblowers reported internally first and were ignored or shut down or fired. So make sure you listen to employee complaints. Look at metrics. Again, you want to document metrics and other things because, again, how otherwise are you going to show the DOJ that you have a functioning, effective compliance program? I urge you to join a professional organization. This gets to the how are your compliance personnel trained? What kinds of continuing ed do they get? You want to subscribe to newsletters, attend webinars like this one. However you do it, make sure you do it. And you want to ask questions. You want to constantly be asking questions. Be curious externally and internally. I have a closing thought. This is the comment from Wei Chen. Again, she was the one who wrote the initial evaluation of corporate compliance programs guidance. She said, if you can come into the DOJ and give fairly reasonable answers to the questions we are asking, congratulations. You are a C student. The A students are not in front of us. And at first I kind of went, what? That's kind of an interest. I don't get that quote. But think about this. The A students have done enough upfront and in advance so that they have resolved their compliance issues. They're addressing their risks such that you don't end up facing the DOJ in a criminal investigation. If the DOJ comes in and asks these questions that are in this webinar of you, you have a problem already. And it's great that you can answer those questions, but the fact that you're even talking to the DOJ indicates that you have a problem, which is why she says you are a C student. So I hope this has been helpful. And do we have any questions out there?
No, not so far.
Okay. Well, I may be leave it for a moment to see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we can wait for a minute at least. If someone has a question, we can answer it. But all along, Heidi, it's a pleasure hosting you today, and I'm very grateful for all the attendees for their time. We thoroughly enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. Again, my contact information is up on the screen. If people don't feel comfortable asking a question or want to ask me something later on, please feel free to contact me. I don't think we have any questions at this point. I don't see any. So Mohammed and Mashoud, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We'll be having more webinar in mid of January and throughout the year in 2021. We'll hope to see you over there. And thanks for your time. Thanks, Heidi, for being here today.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great day.